Hi, everyone. It's Pam Pariso with Keller Williams Realty, Southern Tier and Finger Lakes. And guess what? I have more to the story about the Seneca Lake Sea Monster. There was so much that I told in a previous video with Gary Emerson in part 1. I had to do a part 2. You know, Seneca Lake, out of the 11 Finger Lakes, is the deepest, the largest, and probably the most mysterious. And it's my favorite personally. But there have been a lot of stories about a sea monster, a sea serpent, a loch-nessy type sightings, and not just one, but many over the years. But we're going to explore more in this video, part 2. Thank you, Gary, for continuing the story of the sea serpent of Seneca Lake.
Sure, I'm glad to be back to talk about it some more. After the incident with the Oceani in 1900, there were other sightings that happened throughout the 20th century. And what we have here is one that happened in 1913, where two Elmira people said they saw this monster in a lake near Glenora and watched it for a while. So there were other sightings.
When you say near Glenora, where specifically is that?
That's on the west side of Seneca Lake, north of Watkins Glen. There's a winery there now called Glenora. Yeah, so the Seneca Lake Sea Serpent story of years duration, which has recurred annually or more often for the last generation, finally is verified by well-known Elmira campers along the lake, says the Elmira Star-Gazette. Have seen the monster and watched it for fully 10 or 15 minutes through a powerful opera glass. They were within 250 feet of it at Mr. Chappell's cottage. It was daylight and both were awake and know what they are talking about. I guess they're trying to say that they were sober.
Okay, well, I've heard stories similar to that, and this was what year? Oh, 1913.
1913 this was, yeah.
Okay.
This is another story from 1914 from the newspaper Watkins Express. They said the Seneca Lake Sea Serpent, at first believed to be a newspaper hoax. Next was the product of vivid imagination of the persons who it was alleged had been seeing things, but for the past year or so has been accepted as being in existence, has been seen again, this time at the end of the lake. This gentleman, John Rowe, who was watching it at the end of the lake in Watkins Glen, was armed with a .38 revolver, went back to the point where the animal had been seen. At first, nothing occurred, but after watching a half hour or so, the serpent suddenly appeared within a few feet of the boat with its head out of the water. Mr. McConnell fired twice, and the animal disappeared in a swirl of water and did not appear again. So here we have another sighting of some kind of a monster in the lake.
The serpent is described as being about 10 feet long and 7 or 8 inches through, with a head of about the size of a man's. On top of the beast's head was a quantity of hair which stuck straight up. The animal was snake-like in appearance and black in color.
Here's a Geneva Times newspaper article in 1936, so it's some years later. They are trying to say that this story is all just a bunch of nonsense, and that what they actually saw was what's called a mud puppy, which I've seen before in the lake, but the mud puppies I've seen aren't very big. They're quite small. They're the size of a fish maybe, but they're trying to say that this thing was actually a mud puppy, and I think I have a picture. Here's a couple pictures of mud puppies, but like I said, they're actually quite small. I don't think they could be 10 feet long. Here's another article.
This is from the Geneva Times, March 9th, 1956. It says, Frank Mills, who lives in the town of Milo, Yates County, took his first train ride to Geneva recently and reports that he plainly saw the renowned Seneca Lake Sea Serpent swimming in the lake just off Glass Factory Bay.
Hey, so that's up near Geneva on the west side of the lake. Here's another article. This one's from 1968. This was a water skier who was in the lake and said that they were being chased by the Seneca Lake Monster, and they were really scared by it. They said that what they saw was as long as the boat.
Oh my.
And the person writing the article said, I hope someone catches one of these big sturgeons. So they seem to say that it wasn't really a monster. It's just a large fish, the sturgeon, and proves that there's no monster or one-man submarine in the lake. There also are some pretty large carp in the lake, but neither carp nor sturgeon has ever been known to attack a human being. So they're talking about the story, but at the same time, they're trying to say it's probably not true, that these people just have vivid imagination. Here's another article from 1929 where they said that the Seneca Lake Sea Serpent terror to cottagers is laid low at last. They said that a sea serpent whose protruding horns, 5-foot neck, and menacing jaws had frightened lovely fishermen and alarmed cottagers for nearly a fortnight by occasional distant appearances had been laid low. And it says that its appearance to Ludwig Berg Jr., meat dealer of the city, who reported seeing the ponderous head and waving horns at close range, organized a group of residents into a concerted hunt for the reptile. Tuesday near Kashong, a distant glimpse of the monster, some careful stalking and a fusillade of shots from the fleet of boats ended the reign of terror. And what they found was it was a large oil drum, carefully balanced to permit a bobbing motion with two wooden horns and a ferociously painted face that met the pursuers who raced to the scene of the kill to administer the coup de grace. And the gulls attracted by the strange object added to the illusion carefully planned by some practical joker. So somebody played a joke, putting something in the lake to make it look like a monster. And it did fool some people for a while, but when they finally caught up to this thing, they found it was just a prank. There's a photo of some boys from Hector who may have been behind this prank. They got this oil drum and you can see they put some horns on it and they painted a face on it and they threw it out in the lake and let it float around. So just to scare people. So some people use the Seneca Lake Monster story to play a trick on people. Here's a gentleman from Elmira who had a diving helmet, and he went out into the lake because he was going to try and solve some of the mysteries of Seneca Lake. He was going to try and solve the mystery of the monster and also the source of the Seneca Lake guns, which is another story about the lake.
Oh, yes. I want to hear about that one later, too.
Yeah, so he went diving and looked around and went in by Fir Tree Point and some other places and didn't really find anything. So really was kind of a fruitless search. Here's a video that somebody took of what they said was the monster. I don't remember the year. I think it was in the early 80s, perhaps. I don't remember.
This is what I'm so excited to see because this seems to be actual video footage. Right, Gary?
Yeah, this is pretty weird to see this, but it's from quite a distance away and you can't really make it up. But you can see something in the water that's kind of eerie and mysterious.
Oh, there appears to be above the surface.
Yeah, you see a head sticking up out of the water.
Oh. Oh my, look at that. I wish we could get a sense of scale for that, but that does seem to be a significant piece of footage.
Mm-hmm. This is an article from, I can't read the date because our screen is covering it up.
1829.
So this shows that even early on, people claim they saw monsters in the lakes. This one was spotted in Lake Ontario and talked about some children said they saw some enormous water snake that was absolutely huge. They said it was 20 or 30 feet in length with a head of 10 or 15 inches in diameter. So even early on, people were spotting things in the lake, mysterious creatures in the lake.
Now this specifically refers to another lake.
Yes,
Okay.
talks about Lake Ontario.
Okay.
But the point was that people believe that if there were such creatures in a lake like Lake Ontario, with the canal system, they could get into the Finger Lakes.
That is true. And then they say there may be even subterranean canals.
That's what some people suspect. People actually suspected that there were some kind of subterranean channels that connected the Finger Lakes to the ocean, and that's where these things were coming from.
Could be.
This is just more in 1867 about the Ontario Serpent, and people saying that they spotted it in the lake. And it says 5 men in a boat saw the Ontario Serpent with its head elevated several feet above the water and its huge form entirely visible near the surface. And it plunged as they rode for it and disappeared. But it resembled, as it lay in the water, the Liberty Pole of Big Soda. So apparently they're saying this thing was quite large. Again, there were monsters spotted in other lakes, and that made people think it's possible they could have been in the Finger Lakes too. And again, here's the canal system showing how it's all connected to the Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and they're all connected to each other and connected to the Finger Lakes. So something large like a sturgeon could move around. Now we talked about the subterranean connection with the ocean, and here's an article that mentions it. Said a number of erroneous beliefs are held regarding Seneca, a common one being that the lake is connected by a subterranean cavern with the ocean, probably arising from the fact that the bottom of a large area of the lake is below sea level. Mr. Wardell said the fairy tale of the Seneca Lake Sea Serpent probably arises from this belief in the subterranean connection with the ocean. He's not a believer in this too much. There are people who did believe there was some kind of a connection.
So Gary, to wrap this up, haven't there been some recent sightings as well?
I believe there have been. I don't know the dates I could give you, but people have claimed even recently that they've seen something odd in the lake, didn't know what it was. And people again start speculating about the Seneca Lake Monster anytime they hear those stories like that. So there's still sightings today of people seeing something in the lake.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much, Gary. That
Sure.
wraps up this episode of the History and Mysteries of Seneca Lake. And would you please join us for some more stories? I'm sure you have many more.
Oh, sure. I'd be glad to.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye.
All right. Yep. Bye now.